April is actually a pretty special month for me because it's the anniversary of when I started drawing. A lot of people probably don't keep track of exactly when they started drawing, but for me I started recently enough that I knew I wanted to save everything, and that as I got older, I would be able to look back at this stuff, and that's what I'm going to do now. Essentially, I have every PNG I've ever drawn saved. I'm at like 2,500 or something now, different like digital pages. But this folder is the cut down version of stuff that at the time that I put it in this folder, I considered it to be finished and something that not necessarily I was proud of, but was a good indication of my skill level at the time. And so what I've considered worthy of going in this folder has changed throughout the years, and so there's a lot of different things in here, but they're all more or less what I would consider my finished art and the complete stuff. So this is extremely cut down compared to my much bigger PNG folder with everything in. This is more or less just the highlights that I've built up throughout the years. By the way, this April is my 6th anniversary of starting to draw, and there's so much more to it than just my art skill improving, and we'll get into this, but I really think learning anything like this that's quite difficult to learn not only teaches you that skill, but teaches you so many things beyond that that are required to obtain any kind of skill like this. You really have to rewrite your brain to be able to become someone who's able to learn like this. Pretty basic starting point. I did do traditional art for about a month before this, so this is me after about a month of drawing. This is the first thing I drew on a tablet. So I bought I think it was called a Huion H420. It was just the cheapest drawing tablet that you could buy at the time, and I think it probably still is. This was me just trying to warm up with the tablet, and it was really difficult, and you can see there's a lot of rough stuff here. No control of my lines or anything like that. No sense of 3D form, and that's going to be the big thing. There's a sudden change at one point in here where things go from 2D to 3D, and then the skill level kind of skyrockets from there, and that's why I've talked about this a few times. I already think 3D forms and understanding 3D forms is the most important thing to learning to draw. So you can see this is all flat, probably copied from somewhere, although I don't really know where it would be copied from. It's interesting how when you're starting out, you aren't even looking at things in the way that a professional would, so even copying something is much harder than you would think, because your mindset just isn't in the right place to even be able to copy something, because you're not understanding the process that the artist who drew the original version went through. So we're going to start speeding up a bit now. This was about 1 month after the previous one. A bit of an upgrade. She does have a body, although the proportions make no sense. I've made the classic mistake of trying to fit parts of the body here that don't make any sense to be here, so she's got this disproportionate body that makes no sense. No flow to the hair or anything like that. You know, these lines aren't that nice, and there's like holes in the color and stuff like that, and it's all very flat. So moving on, this is one where I made a pretty significant mistake of thinking that making good art just required putting in more time. So I think this was the only time I used vector layers, and basically the idea was if I just worked on it for as long as it took, then I'd end up with a good result. But as you can see, that's not how things work. This probably is a step up from the previous one. It's more clean, although at the same time it's kind of lacking any personality. But my theory that all you had to do was put more time into something to get a good result wasn't true. It's better to practice and actually build up your skills. There's a lot of Hatsune Miku stuff in here. As time goes on, things are going to start to get more varied, and I am going to move into more figure drawing and stuff like that. This one was more ambitious. You can see I've drawn more of the body and a more interesting pose. I'm pretty sure I copied this pose off the cover for Hyrule Warriors, the pose that Zelda's in. I'm fairly certain that's what this is. But as you can see, again, very flat forms. I'm using some weird half transparent brush, and the colors aren't very nice. Really, I'm just still figuring out the basics at this point. Really, I would say this phase of learning to draw, it can be quite frustrating because you're rarely going to get a result that you enjoy looking at. All you're doing is learning how to control the pen more or anything. It's like a toddler learning to crawl at this point, more so than even learning to walk. You're really just learning the basic controls of what you can do and slowly building up your brain to a place where you're going to be able to learn what you're not doing correctly, and that's going to cause you to want to look into these things and research how you can get better, and from there your understanding of things is just going to keep improving. This diva picture, she's kind of, her hair looks more like a rug that's been thrown over her head as opposed to actual hair. I always thought that looked kind of funny. Yeah, just struggling to understand any kind of 3D forms, and it's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're starting out. You really are thinking in lines a lot of the time, just a flat image. So this is me 7 months into learning to draw. I was 17 at this point. I think the art is getting more appealing now, and it's not really down to studying anatomy or anything like that, but I think just looking at other people's art and understanding where I was wrong to start with, and very slowly trying to get a grasp of how a professional artist would do these things, and learning to copy symbols to start with, as opposed to even knowing that 3D forms is a thing at this point. But I'm getting better at that, and it's developing my eye and ability to improve at this stuff. This is one of the first drawings that I was really proud of, and I still think, looking at what we've seen so far, this is the most appealing one, and it even still to this day has some level of appeal. I think the colors are quite nice. Yeah, overall it looks okay. There are issues, like mostly the hair. I really struggled with hair, and it's kind of funny because it's one of those things that I never really learned, but I feel like I can more or less do now just by understanding art in general. And this was at a time, although I guess I still am like this, but I never knew what I was going to get when I started drawing, and like I said, that still is a thing now, but even more so back then. I didn't even want to be good at drawing. I had basically given up on that. I just wanted something that looked about right, and it was really frustrating not even being able to get something that kind of looked okay. And this was the first one. I remember I would have been really zoomed in trying to color this, and then I zoomed out when I was done, and I was amazed that I had drawn this. I was just blown away that my skill level had gotten to this point where I could do this, and I was just really excited about it. And art still is like that to this day, I think. You don't really feel like you're improving on a day-to-day basis, but then every now and then you'll finish something and you just take a step back, and it's surprising that you've managed to do it. It's good to remember those victories, I think, as you work through this stuff. So we're getting to the point where I had been drawing for about a year now, but you can see I'm still very inconsistent, and I'm not understanding 3D forms. I'm becoming more ambitious in what I'm attempting, but by not really understanding fundamentals, it's definitely holding me back, and it's kind of random the outcome I get each time because I don't really understand what I'm doing. This was another one I was quite proud of at the time. Looking at it now, not so much the kind of eyebrow ridge with the eyebrows above it. I kind of know what I was going for because that is a kind of a thing that happens in anime, but it doesn't really look very good the way I've done it here. The nose looks very strange. And so this one's alright, and I was trying to be ambitious and trying to do things that I didn't know how to do, but the practice that I was doing was still keeping my art very flat. And when your art is flat, it's so much harder to become consistent, I think. But you can see, despite not really knowing what I'm doing, the appeal is going up just by seeing how other stylized art works. And I probably was studying some anatomy at this point, and I was just trying to get a grasp of the very basics, and it can take a long time to warm your brain up to that point, but by having nicer colors and things like that, the art is already starting to look a lot nicer, I think. So we've got some practice with different expressions and things like that. This was some kind of challenge where you would draw your most played Overwatch character in the colors of your 5 most played Overwatch characters, and this was one that I was really proud of at the time, and it was another moment of, oh, I can't believe I do that came out really well. These days not so much. I don't know why she's got such a long chin. Again, with the flat forms and not really understanding what they are, it's just this cheekbone shape. I think a lot of people do this. They know that it exists and there should be a dip in the face, but they don't really understand how to. First of all, they don't understand how it's working in reality, and because of that, they're not understanding how it's then stylized to work in different ways. So you end up with just a weird chunk cut out of the face in a random place that doesn't really mean anything. So here I'm taking inspiration from different artists, trying to copy different things. This is actually quite interesting because the most recent artwork we're going to get to is also a K-On! Artwork with this character, Yui. Here again, I was probably just copying other people. and trying to get a basic grasp of it. So you can see I copied the style quite directly here, but despite that, there's no 3D forms, and so it's not something I could easily replicate. And as you can see, I was, I guess, trying to replicate it, but because I didn't understand it outside of just flat lines, it falls apart pretty quickly. So we're getting midway through 2017 now. I guess I was getting more ambitious with backgrounds and things like that, but again, just getting consistent with appeal and nice looking art was not a thing I could do at this point. And despite being ambitious or putting time in, or even choosing probably nice colors like I did here, I just didn't understand what I was doing well enough, and so you often end up with kind of not great looking results. We've got some faces here, again, like just not understanding the shape of the face properly, or the 3D forms. And I know I've said that a lot, the 3D forms are really, really important, and that's why when people ask how I've learned to draw, I would recommend going to something like Draw a Box pretty early on, because that's going to put you in the right mindset, I think, right at the start, in a way that trying to learn something like anatomy without understanding 3D forms first just isn't going to get you as quickly. So what I always tell people is just do Drawbox first, and then do like Proko's basic figure drawing and anatomy courses, and read Andrew Loomis books. And I would say those are the 3 main things that are going to really put you on the right track to learning. And those are 3 things that I'm pretty sure I didn't know about at this point, or for a couple of years after this, and you'll see the point where those things really start to affect my art. So even if you don't believe me based on what you've seen so far, when we get to the point where those 3 things that I would recommend started to impact my art, I think you'll see the improvement really take off. That said, at this point the art is still steadily improving. You can see progress with figure drawing and stuff like that here. Maybe it's becoming a bit more consistent, and I'm still trying a lot of things with trying to force things into perspective and things like this, but I didn't understand what I was doing well enough for that to really work. But the art is definitely improving. This is one that I liked for a while. I thought it came out quite well, but as you can see, not really very consistent in the way that I'm drawing. It doesn't really mean much if you get a good result, if every time you draw, you really have no idea what you're going to end up with. So we're getting into 2018 now, and I was definitely studying anatomy at this point, so here's one of the first attempts at realism we're going to see in here, and as you can see, it's not very good, but there is definitely progress as time goes on. This was literally drawn the next day, and I think I had learned from my mistakes a bit, though still very flat, and the understanding of 3D forms isn't really there in any useful way. So we've got some failed attempts at faces here. Again, not really understanding what I'm doing. Here's an interesting one, because I quite liked this at the time, but this is a good, I think, comparison to my most recent art, because there is no perspective in here. There is a lack of understanding in terms of forms, which makes the face look a bit weird, and there's no background, which is fine, but I think it makes a huge difference to put your art in its own unique world, as opposed to someone just standing in the void or putting a geometric shape behind them, as I often do in these. Then there's also the kind of lack of composition here. If anything, this composition is backwards, because everything is taking you out of the image, I would say. Especially, I guess she's facing away because that's part of her character. I can't really remember these characters' names. Akko, Susie, or something like that. I don't know this girl's name. It's something like that. This is Little Witch Academia, by the way, if you haven't seen that. But yeah, the composition, she's kind of facing you out of the image. This is all pointing you out. This is pointing you out. Her foot is, I guess, pointing you out as well. Yeah, it's not very good composition, and they don't really feel like they exist anywhere. Having the background also leads you into being able to use real photography as a inspiration for your art, and that is what really completes things, I think, and that's what you're going to see in my really most recent stuff, the only few most recent, where I realized I shouldn't just be thinking of art in terms of art, like a character in a flat plane. I should be looking at photography and trying to create a world in the way that photography is an image of the world, and the way eyes and cameras work isn't as straightforward as this is a good example. Everything here is in focus. The light is not extreme at all. You can see everything, every detail, everything despite whether it's lit or not. You can see outside this window while you're seeing inside the house at the same time. So the eye or the camera lens, basically the same thing. It's not adjusted to anything. So this feels like an artwork. It feels like an extremely flat art where nothing really feels real and it doesn't really have any kind of impact on you. It just kind of is there, but it's very bland and boring. And I guess this is another good example of putting in a lot of effort doesn't necessarily mean you get a better result. I put in a lot of Vocaloid references into this. I tried quite hard. I put a lot of time into this, but it's just not very good. And this was also one of the first attempts you'll see in here of trying to get perspective right. And I roughly knew what perspective was, but I wasn't sure how to do it. I think I actually might have traced this background, to be honest, from like an IKEA picture or something like that. I'm fairly certain that's what I ended up resulting to. But even then, like, these lines are just wrong. Like, I don't know why this would be happening here. So it doesn't really work. Understanding basic anatomy in 3D forms is highly recommended. So we've got some... what's this film called? A Silent Voice. I guess I watched that and wanted to draw the characters from it. Again, this isn't something that I would consider worthy of putting in this folder now, but I like to leave it how it is and not really take things out based on my expectations changing, because the whole point of the folder is that it is reflective of my mindset at that point in time, so I don't really want to mess around with it or anything like that. Here we've got something a bit different. This is a Super Smash Bros. Moveset for Cat from Gravity Rush. I put quite a lot of time into this, and people who like Gravity Rush seem to quite like it, although none of the art is actually very good. Because there was so much of it, I had to cut corners just to try and get it done, even then it took a very long time. So moving on with more realism stuff, I guess I got a bit better at faking an understanding of 3D forms, but I really didn't at this point. And the thing that reflects that the most, I think, is how soft all of these shadows are. I made a mistake that a lot of people make in that I was just too scared to work with light, and that's because I didn't understand the forms I was drawing, and the human head is a very complex form that is going to be hard to get those shapes right, but it's better to just do it than to end up with really soft, muddy shadows like this that aren't really describing anything. So you can tell, although this one, it does kind of look okay from a distance, when you zoom in I clearly didn't know what I was doing and I didn't understand these forms. This stage of my art really brings back a lot of memories because I remember drawing most of these before work. So this is when I worked in retail, and it was in some ways like the most depressing period of my life, like especially in autumn. So I would work late in the day. I'd work like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. and because I'd get home late, I would get up late the next day. So I'd get up at like 12, and especially in winter it would basically already be dark outside. You know, we'll get like 2 months at a time with no direct sunlight because on the rare occasion it's sunny, it's like cloudy, so it's not very nice. And yeah, especially when you're working like 3 to 11, you're just in the dark all the time. So I have very vivid memories of periods of my life where I would get up late and I'd be just tired and unhappy, and I'd try to draw because I knew that's what I wanted to do, and then I'd go to work for 8 hours and I'd just be living in darkness for like over a month. And a lot of this art reminds me of periods like that. But in the end, I am glad I did it and I stuck to it, because although my art progress on a daily basis really wasn't much because I had so little time or motivation or energy for it, I was able to slowly build my way up to the point where I then quit that job, and then I grinded out art for about a year, which the period of my life where that happens I think will be pretty noticeable in terms of skill level changing. And then I was able to work in graphic design, and now I'm drawing a lot more. And I think you can really see there is going to be a point in this that I mentioned a couple of times where I think there's a clear line between not knowing how to draw and then really starting to understand how to draw. And I'm not saying I'm a professional or I'm particularly good at this point, but instead of arts like this that is clearly very amateurish, I'm getting art that I personally continue to like for months after it's finished, and I think I will probably always like to some extent because it does just look kind of nice, and really that's all you need. This is Yumeko from Kakegurui. I was pretty happy with this one at the time. It's pretty heavily referenced, and this is an example of, again, putting too much time into something, I think, because although there's no impressive rendering or anything like that, this one took just hours and hours and hours to try and get things like the eyes right, because I simply didn't understand what I'm doing. But this is one of the most appealing ones I think we've seen so far that kind of holds up, although, you know, things like the lips don't really work. These are flat symbols on a face, really, but it overall kind of works, and so I guess I'm happy about that. But my art was still very inconsistent, and again, these are all just like trying to draw before work or after work when I'm tired, and very slowly getting my skill level to creep up, but not in a way that I feel I'm in any way consistent or really know what I'm doing. And again, that can be quite frustrating. With something like this, this is clearly better from where we started, but I still just feel like my art isn't appealing to look at, and I'm not proud of it. And to be fair, I still agree with that to this day. Like, her mouth in particular is like way too big and not very nice. I was picking up stuff from other artists. We've got detail with the tights here. I've actually drawn some veins in her thighs, I think, which, although I guess I appreciate the want to have detail there, that doesn't really work. You probably wouldn't see such clear veins in thighs of all places, especially when she's got like fat thighs. So maybe put detail like that in a place that makes more sense. So although there's ambition, and I think that's the main thing in most of these, which I didn't even necessarily realize at the time with something like this, like it's kind of ugly, but I was being ambitious to some extent and trying stuff that I didn't know how to do. And so I think that's really one of the main reasons I was able to get to the point I'm at now, is just having the ambition to want to figure out this stuff. This is an interesting one, again, not something that I would put in this folder now, but I guess I was proud of how much better I had got at copying, and to be fair, this is a very significant improvement of trying to copy official Overwatch art. You can see my eye for how the structure of these things worked considerably improved, and as you slowly improve your understanding of what you're even looking at, it really helps, and it makes a huge amount of difference. It's amazing how as a beginner you're not even really seeing what's there, because you just haven't developed that artist brain yet. And going back to where I started, I didn't have that either, and I hope a video like this can be inspiration for people who are starting out at a level like mine, where you're 16 years old and you've never drawn in your life, and everything you draw looks like a 2-year-old trying to draw an anime girl. Well, because that's basically what it is, really. It's someone with absolutely zero artist brain developed because you haven't worked on it trying to draw, and so that's the point that you're going to start in, and it's going to take a long time to build your way up into a point where you can even see a drawing for what it actually is. And that's just how it is, but that should also be exciting that I really think anyone can do it, and I think I'm proof of that. This was a phase where I was trying to get out art daily, or at least finishing something in a day to post it, and I was thinking in terms of being consistent on social media and things like that, and I still do that, but I just wasn't at a level to do it back here. You can see the proportions are all over the place and the expressions aren't nice to look at, and I had ideas, but I just wasn't consistent, and it's very frustrating trying to draw and never knowing if the result will look like anything. This is something I put a lot of time into, as for some kind of online collaboration thing, and it's actually one of the highest resolution things I think I've ever drawn, because you've got like reflections in the eyes and things like this. But again, being ambitious, but not really knowing what I'm doing to begin with, and so the end result isn't something I'm that proud of, because it just doesn't look very good. Another important point about this one, which connects to something I mentioned earlier, is the photography thing. Notice how everything here is in focus, because I felt like I had to get every single little detail right. If I looked at actual photography, I would have realized that that doesn't make any sense, and I probably would have got a lot nicer result here if I had all this background out of focus and I had these lights really glowing, and maybe the glowing effect showing through her hair and having some little white hairs showing out here. This is all the stuff that you pick up just by looking at things and developing your eye to see what you're really looking at. And so this artwork really would have benefited from me understanding things like that at the time that I have learned since then. I don't know why this is in here. these proportions are really ugly and weird looking, but I guess at the time I felt it was necessary. This one I was really happy with at the time. Back then I was just excited to have hair that looked like anything, and so this was the first time I used this brush, and I felt like this is the best hair I'd ever drawn, and so I was pretty excited about that because it was hair that looked like hair. And I definitely think hair is maybe the thing I struggle with the most in my time learning to draw. It really is something that you can't draw based on how it really is, because you can't draw every strand, and so you can paint to imply a lot of strands, or you just need to understand like 3D forms and flow and just trial and error until it starts to work, really. In a lot of these, the hair isn't that great just because it is a difficult thing to get right. This was again when I was trying to finish something in a day to get consistent art out, but my proportions and consistency just wasn't there. Like, look at how thick her neck is. I don't know how I didn't see this stuff at the time that I was drawing it, but it goes to show that despite everything I had been through at this point, I still wasn't really making very good art. And this is 2.5 years into drawing every single day, and this is how my art looked, and it is an improvement, but I think we can all agree it's not that great or that nice. So if you are learning to draw, this is still the phase of developing the very fundamentals of my art brain, and these things do take a long time. So I think you should be prepared for that, and the sooner you start to learn properly, the better, but it's going to take a lot of self-improvement and growth to even be able to do that. With this, I think we're starting to get to the point where things are going to start to get really interesting, and my skill level hits a certain point around here where I'm on the verge of that line I mentioned earlier, but I'm still on the bad side of that line right now. This one came out pretty well, I think, but the more you look at it, the more it falls apart. Her ankles are extremely thick. That's one thing, and the feet are kind of weird. I hadn't really drawn feet at this point. The anatomy isn't great when you zoom in. It's like, what am I really looking at here? And then with the nose and things like that. But overall, it's a fairly appealing image if you don't look at it too hard. If you like squint your eyes, it looks kind of nice, I think. And so I was really starting to get to that line. And this is from learning things like Proko and Loomis that really helped me out, I think. So while we're going through these couple of images of me basically on this line of basically not knowing how to draw into kind of knowing how to draw, I want to talk a little bit about the mindset that I had to develop to even get to this point. So when I was starting out, I really couldn't draw for maybe more than an hour in a day, and I would mostly play video games every day, and that's just kind of what my brain was wired to do. Getting to a high skill level in anything is extremely hard, but something like a video game is different from something like drawing, because video games are kind of free dopamine regardless of what you do. So even if you play badly or you're not really improving, you're thrown into, the battlefield or whatever, things are going to happen, you have to move. And it doesn't really take much effort on your part to, input yourself into that world and get something out of it, because it's running anyway. And of course, getting to a esports level in a game is extremely hard and takes a lot of time, but to engage in a game doesn't really take any brain power if you don't want it to. Something like drawing, that page is going to stay blank unless you put something down onto it, and so everything that goes on that page requires thought from you and understanding of what that thing is, and it requires every fundamental there is, form and composition and color theory and just everything. And so it took me a long time to slowly build my way up to a point where I could consistently draw more and more. And throughout these years, as you'll see more and more progress, I've gone from only being able to do 1 hour a day to I'll easily do 6 or 7 if I'm working on something that I'm enjoying. And at a bare minimum, I tend to do 5, with some of that being creative work and some of that being studying and trying to make sure I'm learning the things to keep improving my skill level. Learning how to draw really takes changing your brain to be more mature and more disciplined, and not focused on like short-term dopamine, but instead understanding how to control dopamine and control yourself and do the work that has to be done to improve, and learning how to focus and learning how you learn. And there's just so much to it. I really think learning any skill is how you not only grow as a person, but figure out who you even are as a person. And you simply aren't going to achieve something like that by just enjoying things. If you just enjoy watching TV, that's not going to develop you as a person, really. I think learning a skill and going through the difficulty that requires is really important for self-growth. And what I've gained from learning a skill isn't even just the skill that I've learned. I really think I've developed my brain into a point where I can do a lot more. So compared to how I was back then when I started 6 years ago, I'm a lot more healthy. I do exercise basically every day because I taught myself how to use dopamine and discipline to learn to draw, and I can do that to do basically anything. So I exercise every day. I only eat once a day, which from my understanding is the healthiest and most effective way to do it. And to a lot of people that seems extremely hard and difficult, but again, because I taught myself how to just do things, I was able to do that fairly easily. I've cut caffeine out of my life completely, despite it basically being addiction when I started learning to draw. And there's a lot of things like this where I've managed to improve myself in so many ways by learning how to learn a skill. And I don't think any school is going to teach you that. I think you need to do it on your own if you really want to be able to learn the hard way and the proper way that is going to basically allow you to do anything you want to do in your life. And with this, we have now arrived at crossing that line of understanding how to draw. So everything before this, even the victories and the good parts, they are pretty immediately followed by failures and inconsistencies and bad art. And to this day, I have that, but in terms of art I would consider finished and that I was proud of, I don't remember everything that is in this folder that we're going to see, but I'm fairly certain basically everything I still enjoy to this day, and I would, get it printed out or something like that. I enjoy looking at it. I would put it on my portfolio, etc. This is where I feel like I cross that line from amateur to whatever's above amateur. I'm not a professional. I mean, technically I do work in graphic design, so maybe, but I'm not at a super high skill level. I'm fully aware of that. But like I said, the line is definitely here where understanding 3D forms with help of things like Drawbox and doing a lot of learning anatomy from Proko and Loomis and going through various arts books that are going to help you learn and tutorials that mix anatomy with 3D forms, like Modern Day James has a lot of good ones, and just enjoying art content. People like Peter Draws, he's a good one. Understanding what I like to draw and how I like to draw and just everything. This is where it all really came together in a way that I had developed my art brain enough to. Now I'm like walking. Now I've stopped crawling and I kind of, I'm bipedal now and I'm stumbling my way on two legs and I'm really learning how to walk. And hopefully in the future I'm going to learn how to run or, jog at least as I improve at this stuff. Pretty immediately after I said this, we get into something that I'm not that proud of and I don't think holds up that well. This was my attempt at doing a Super Smash Bros. Ultimate render of Hatsune Miku in, those renders are 3D models. This is just a 2D image. So it's not awful as an attempt to that. It's definitely above what I was doing before. You can see with things like the hair, it has improved pretty significantly, and I've learned to put all these like textures and stuff in and try to do something cool, and my understanding of light is better, although at this point I would say my understanding of color and light is the main thing holding me back. So this one's not so great, but it still is a step up. Here's a cat from Gravity Rush. This one's very simple, but I always thought it was really cute and I quite like this one. To this day I'm pretty happy with it, although I've been told it's like worse than arts that came before it. I don't know, I quite like this one, and yeah, she's pretty cute. We've got Rosalina here. This is pretty directly based off a reference. Again, the hair looking much nicer. the colors and overall appeal. The face is stylized and it's definitely not perfect, but it has enough appeal that I don't think it would stand out to you that it's weird looking, and the anatomy has improved enough that I can start to do something kind of nice. We've got this one. Again, this is going a bit higher than what my skill level was, so I'm not very happy with this one, but like it's fine. The understanding of color and light, again, is the main thing holding this back and making it look a little bit weird. This one was a Christmas present for someone who specifically wanted something like this, so I tried, and I don't really like it because it was above what I could achieve at the time, but it has enough there that it's okay. So something else, a little bit basic, but the overall appeal is there and it looks fine. I would say this is where my art started getting to the point where I could do things like this more consistently, and this one I still quite like to this day, but the step up after this was, you can see I've added chromatic aberration here. The step up from here was really understanding, or starting to understand, the photography side of things and making things look more like a photograph as opposed to just a grey background here. It works for, do they call them pin-up pictures? I don't know if that's what this is. It's just a girl on a blank background, and that's how you tend to start drawing. But looking at photography and thinking, how can I make this drawing like a photograph that I'm building from scratch? It's its own world. That I think is really the step up from here that I will start to develop and that you'll start to see. So again, the art is looking a lot nicer. A lot of this stuff is perfectly nice. This one I'm not so happy with. I'm not really sure what happened with this one. Just kind of ended up being a bit ugly. Something about the face and the colors, I don't know. So still with some inconsistencies. Still frequently trying things that are harder than what I'm able to do, but it's definitely more consistent now. This is an interesting one because I hated this when I finished it. This was one of my first attempts at really trying to push that perspective, and I was trying to do more of a painterly style with certain parts. I was embarrassed to post this, and yeah, like I said, I really hated it, but looking at it now, it's actually alright. It's a bit strange, I think. The eyes feel flat, whereas like the nose and the rest of the face feel like they've been painted, so it's a weird mix of styles, but I don't think it's that unappealing. I actually think I like this a lot more than I did when I first finished it. So moving on, we've got a lot more Miku stuff still. Trying to get some more of those photography elements in here. You can see there is atmospheric perspective on her feet here, so I'm pushing them back, but she is just on a blank background, and it's overall not that visually interesting, although the characters are getting better. Here I started doing a lot more with glow dodge and color dodge to really make that skin look like light is going through it. That's called subsurface scattering. Yeah, that's a really important one if you want appealing colors, to understand subsurface scattering. I didn't really understand it here that well, but the basic concept was there, and so I ended up with some nice colors, although she's, again, kind of in this weird void, and it doesn't really feel like a photograph, even though I am, again, trying to add some of that atmospheric perspective and things like that. It just doesn't feel real. It feels like a drawing on a canvas, which is what I think the next step after this is trying to move away from. At this point, I was getting a lot better at my sketches, just looking pretty good. This actually, I think, is in the first ever learning to draw video. So this point here is when I made this channel. So that's pretty interesting. Everything you've seen before that is my past before this channel ever existed. From now on is the progress I've made while this YouTube channel has existed, and I think I've improved quite a lot in that time thanks to the feedback I've gotten and things like that. I think putting myself out there was a really good idea, and I had the idea for this channel, but it just wasn't something I committed to until now, and I am happy I did that. This one is a great example of wanting to push that art forward, and so I can draw an okay looking like anime girl, not the best, but I wanted to push it forward, and I wanted perspective, and I wanted focus and things like this, but I just wasn't able to do it in a really appealing way. So again, she's just in the void, and I've tried to make that more interesting by making it lighter where her head is. So I'm thinking about composition, and I'm trying to get focus on her arm getting closer to the camera here, but I just don't understand these tricks well enough to use them effectively. If you really wanted to do something like this, you'd want this arm coming right at the camera, I think, and that would make it look a lot nicer. Her leg being out of focus doesn't really make any sense if we're doing focus in terms of front to back, so because this is in the same like plane as her head would be, and then this is in focus. So I don't really understand what I'm doing clearly, but I'm trying to attempt to do these things, which is what will develop into me slowly understanding these things well enough that I'm able to look into things and ask the right questions, and then I'll be able to eventually do it. This one I still like. This is a Blades artwork. It's lacking in gesture, but it was something new and it was something interesting, and yeah, I quite like it. I really think a strong style makes things live longer. For example, if you look at video games like The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker compared to Twilight Princess, Twilight Princess came afterwards, but if you compare like the GameCube version of both of those, Wind Waker probably holds up better because it more heavily relies on style, and so it doesn't become outdated as quickly. And it's kind of the same with something like this, is it's stylized enough that I don't think there's any real fundamental flaws in the way that it's set up, as much as, you know, it's not the best version that it could be. It definitely could be better. It could have more gesture and things like that, but with like the way the character is colored, it doesn't feel muddy and weird because I'm trying to do this realism that I don't understand. I'm simply doing black cell shading, and because it's stylized, I can get away with a bit more and it still looks good, I think. I don't really know why this is in here, but I guess I thought it was pretty cool at the time. This is moving into a period of me trying to be less of a perfectionist. So the idea here was that I would just get something out and I wouldn't worry about like mess and things like this. And I've kind of relapsed into being a bit of a perfectionist now. I do think the mindset I had back then was right, and I should go back to it a bit. This one was maybe a bit too far, at least in terms of trying to create something polished. This is really not polished at all, and I don't like this one that much. One of the main things that bugs me about this that I don't understand is I had these light things going around her, but it would have made so much more sense to use these to describe the form. So this one is like the only one that's done properly, where it shows you that her arm is going downwards, but then these, you know, it's definitely possible that those lights could be going the other way, but in terms of just showing the form, it would make so much more sense to have them like this. And the same with the hair, because it's moving outward, I feel like these should be flipped around and show us that the hair's moving out this way. It just always bugs me when I look at this. I don't understand why I did it that way. So getting into more painting and stuff like that, here's the first animation in here that I guess I thought was worthy of going in the abridged folder. So I still quite like this one to this day. It's nothing, you know, incredible, but I think it's pretty cool, and I like looking at it. And it was good practice with understanding the forms of the human head as well, because when you're moving light around like this, you need to understand what you're actually doing. And so I had to use some references and things like that, which helped me learn as I was doing this. Moving into another Blades artwork, and we're really getting towards the end here. This is me trying to be really ambitious with backgrounds and action and composition. This isn't the best composition in the world, but I did think about it, and trying to have a clear focal point with a scene where so much is going on and there's so much detail is quite difficult, but I think I managed to pull it off. It definitely isn't hard to know what you're supposed to be looking at, I don't think. Again, the lack of gesture is probably the main thing here that holds it back. All this blue stuff back here, I figured I was drawing the sky at first, but then I realized that that doesn't make any sense because we're looking down. This should be buildings as far as you can see all the way to the horizon line, but I just didn't understand that at this point. So that was a pretty silly mistake, but this is definitely the start of me really trying to consider those photo tricks and not have detail where I don't need them. These cards are maybe a bit lazy, and I should have had more going on there because they are quite big in the screen comparatively. If they were smaller, it might not matter as much, but I'm skipping steps that are unnecessary while also trying to have a lot of detail and trying to have a focus on things like this. So I think this was the start of me really thinking about things in terms of photography, and with getting more consistent. You know, these are nothing special, but they were fun. I still like this angry inkling. I don't know why I like it so much, but there's something about it. I just enjoy. This was a really good learning point for me about color. Someone helped me out by explaining... The main thing I took away from this was about light bouncing off of things. So you can see the light bouncing off of her hair. And it feels so much better when light doesn't just go into an object and stick there, because, you know, that's not what light does. If that's what light did, the planet would be black. You know, there wouldn't be any light. The whole thing about light is that it bounces. And so when light bounces, you're going to be creating halo effects in certain areas like this, where it's bouncing off an area that's reflective, that it's hitting really strongly. And I've got some nice texture in here and things like this. This is probably one of the best I've done to this day in terms of painting, I think. I don't really enjoy painting things to this level, and especially as I move more into animation, I find myself wanting to do slightly more simple things, but compared to where I started, definitely the understanding of color and light and things like this is so much better, and I do continue to improve from here as well as I figure out how I want to draw. This is another good example of, you know, just being ambitious, I guess, and figuring out what I want to make based on how I feel about the ambitious stuff that I've done. And so really getting towards the end here, even something quick and simple like this, so much better than when I started. You know, drawing tubes for the legs. I'm understanding that it's a 3D form and there's some nice enough colors. With something like this that's very flat and stylized, I understand, I guess, the basic appeal and the basic gesture and just things that look nice. I roughly know what looks good because I've developed my eye enough to be able to do that. With something like this, it's pretty quick and not very polished, which was intentional, and I quite like this one as much as it is kind of a mess. But again, the lack of really having any kind of background really holds it back. I think if there was some, even if it was out of focus, if she was in front of some kind of cave or a monster or something, whatever Samus thing she's doing, I think it would have really brought it together and turned it into something more complete. And this is the phase where that started to really bug me, where these characters were turning out okay, but I'm finishing them and then, you know, I put a line behind her to avoid it just being a blank background, or I just put a triangle behind this one to stop it just being a blank background. And this one bugged me so much that I even made a whole video about it, about how this is almost worse than my lower skill level art because it's so boring and there's no real interest here and it doesn't really feel like anything. It just is a random gesture with a random expression on a blank background in a world that doesn't exist, and it's just not that interesting to look at. So I think this one was a turning point for me, where things start to move into using those photography tricks that I was talking about more and more, that really start to bring things together. So with this one, I tried a more interesting perspective. Not much going on with the background, but you can see I tried. I've got this Emmy in the background, the things from Metroid Dread. I don't like this one that much. I feel like it's just not that good in terms of color and light, but it's all right. And the 3D forms of her body, I think, worked out pretty well. Like the elbow here, I still think looks quite good. Overall, it just didn't quite work, but it was a good attempt, I think. And now we're getting into the most recent stuff that I still quite like. This one, we've got a more interesting background, a more interesting scenario. You can kind of make up your own story here. We've got a pretty interesting looking character. It doesn't go too far with the photography effects, and the main thing that I mentioned earlier is the chromatic aberration. It's on top of everything, but I've made it really faint because chromatic aberration on top of everything not only doesn't really make any sense, but it is very distracting and it would ruin the image. So I've just got really light chromatic aberration on everything, which it does add more texture, and I think texture is important in anything. If this was just a flat grey floor, it would not look very good, but because I've thrown a texture on there, it looks so much nicer, and that texture can be basically anything you want it to be, but just doing flat doesn't really work a lot of the time and it doesn't look very good. So you can see everything here is textured to some extent, and so the chromatic aberration helps with that, but in terms of photography it doesn't really go too far with it. So while I probably would have done this a bit differently now, I still quite like this one. And then we get into my Bomb Rush Cyberpunk graffiti entry. I did not win that competition, by the way. They did announce the winners, which were all very good. Kind of disappointed. I'm still proud of this one, and I still think it would fit in the game as a graffiti thing. So I'm not like angry about it, but I am disappointed because I genuinely think this is good enough, and I don't normally have that high of an opinion of my own work. So the fact I think that makes me confident that I'm probably right. I still quite like this one, but you know, it doesn't have to be in the game. I can just be happy that it exists, I guess. And then getting into my most recent stuff, really trying to be more ambitious, as always, trying to implement those photography tricks. The lighting doesn't really make any sense, as I mentioned before. She's being lit from the front, while this gate is being lit from behind, while these buildings are being lit directly from the side. But it's all coming from the same side, roughly, so I don't think anyone really cares enough to notice. But we've got this out of focus background, which goes more out of focus, so it really starts to feel like a photo. Not that I'm trying to make it hyper realistic, of course. I'm just trying to make it feel like its own world. I want you to feel like this place is alive, and this town doesn't feel that alive, to be fair. I could have done more with it, but I've got the cars, I've got the birds, I've got like the dust behind her that's out of focus, that's hitting the light, and then she's just kind of chilling up here. And I want you to be able to feel as much as possible that what you're looking at is a living, breathing world and not just a character on a flat piece of paper. Moving into a character on a flat piece of paper, this is a little bit different because this is animation. You would have seen this if you see my recent videos. It's an animation that I recently finished. The more I watch this, the less I like it, I think. My flaws are very clear and I know what they are very precisely at this point. I know what I need to do better next time, but that's cool. I will do that, and I will make sure my future animations are better. So moving into the final image, we've got this one. Now, despite everything I've gone through in this video, we've essentially moved from anime fan art to anime fan art. I'm basically where I started in terms of interests, and you show a picture of Yui way earlier. I like the same things, but the skill level is clearly just like uncomparable. This is me, like I said, learning to walk here and understanding art. When I draw an anime face, I'm understanding the 3D forms here. I understand the anatomy that turned into creating this deformed anime anatomy. I've got more interesting expressions, although my expressions still aren't very good. That's something I need to work on. But I've got composition, where things are pointing you to other things and kind of keeping you in this circle here. I've got a fully rendered background that is out of focus because it's in the background. I've got multiple characters in a scene, which I don't think has been a thing in many of these at all, but they are proportionate to each other. I've got additional detail in the background that really isn't needed. I've got additional detail on things like this that I now know how to get this kind of effect. I have the light behind her creating these cool effects, with it hitting her hair and also separating the foreground from the background. And just all these things really come together, and I don't want to sound like big-headed here, and again, I don't think my skill level is that high, but I know a lot of people who watch these videos feel like they couldn't achieve my level. I see a lot of people saying they wish they could draw like I do, and so I just want to be clear that if you're looking at something like this and you just don't understand it, you don't understand how I ended up with an end result like this, it's important to keep in mind that I kind of don't either. It's just the things that you pick up when you do this every day for 6 years. And so don't worry about not understanding something that looks way too complex. Just focus on the level that is slightly above you and work towards that and slowly improve yourself. And do be ambitious. Like I've mentioned with a lot of these, I was trying things I didn't know how to do, but don't worry if you don't know how to do it. And if this seems too difficult, like I think I've shown you, it just does take a long time. And it's not even all as simple as I'm improving my art skill level, I'm learning anatomy and things like this. Your brain is going to develop and change, and your entire personality in certain ways is going to be rewritten to allow for this learning to happen. And so it's not a simple process, it's a long transformation process, but you can do it. So going into a couple of quick comparisons here, just to explain some of my earlier points. You can see no 3D forms here, very different from something like this, which her eyes are even very similar. The style is and aim at the same thing, but my eyes just weren't good enough to really know what I was looking at or to understand these forms, and so it's a huge difference even when you're trying the same thing. So you can see with something like this is the difference between being on the side of the line where you don't have an art brain yet, and this is the side of the line where you're starting to develop that art brain. This is just stickers on a weird shape. When I say stickers, I mean like the eyes are just a flat form and the nose is just a line on this weird arbitrary head shape with like a rug thrown over her head for hair, despite trying a similar style. And so it just is the difference between trying every day and slowly figuring out how this stuff works. And one more point just to talk about the photography thing. Here's the Little Witch Academia picture from earlier. So this is what I mean. I think you can see the difference in just the feel you get from these. This feels like a world. It feels warm. It feels like someone was behind the camera taking that picture, which I really wanted for this one in particular because there's two characters from K-On! That aren't in the frame that I wanted you to feel like we're still there because they're taking the picture. Although that only really works if you've seen the show. But with something like this, it's just characters on a mostly blank background. I threw a geometric shape in there to fill the space with the composition that doesn't make any sense. There's no perspective. Everything's completely in focus. There's no light, really. I mean, there's like this basic idea of what light is where I assume the light is coming from above and then things are darker when they're under something. That's basically what I've done here. There's no subsurface scattering, there's no ambient occlusion, there's nothing like this. And so it's a completely different feel when you're trying to think in terms of building a photograph as opposed to just drawing a flat character on a flat piece of paper. And so I hope this visually shows the point I'm making with the photography thing. Like I said, you are looking at almost exactly 6 years of progress between these two. And as you can see, I am not quote-unquote talented. I know people throw that word around quite liberally to mean different things. I don't really like the word talented because I do think it implies inherent skill, which I simply didn't have. Clearly not true if you look at the picture on the left. I don't have what I think talent is. I just have a skill that I've built up over time that's completely rewritten my brain to be able to do this stuff. And you can do it too. Maybe it will take 6 years. Maybe it will take longer. Maybe you just ask someone who will take longer, or you'll focus on different things. That's completely fine, but you can do it. I am not one of these Japanese artists that you see that drew like this picture on the left, and then they're claiming to draw 10 times better than this picture on the right after like 1 year of practice. There are some people who can do that. Maybe you're one of them. I'm not. It takes more than half a decade to start getting decent. So that's just how it is. But it can be done, and that's the important bit. If you want to do it, you can do it. And I've seen a few people talk down on doing things you're not good at. I often see people, even like well-respected people, talking in a way as if you should just focus on what you're good at, and that is what you do, and that's just how the world is. I don't accept that at all. I think if you have the dedication to do something, that is then what you're going to become good at because it's what you're going to do. And I think you can absolutely rewrite your brain to do the things you want to do. It's a different thing if you claim you want to draw, as basically any person on the planet will, and then not take any action. That isn't really wanting to draw. You have to actually do it, or maybe you don't want to do it as much as you think you do because you're not doing it, right? But anyone who does do it can learn how to do it better, and I think that's really important. So keep learning how to learn, develop your discipline, and learn how to control your dopamine, despite the fact every company on the planet wants you to not be able to control your dopamine because they want you to, impulse buy and sit on the couch all day. And you got to learn to fight that, and you got to learn how to do things, and you got to learn how to learn. So keep doing those things. You can do it. I managed to do it somehow. By the way, if you do want to improve your art for free, you can join the Learning to Draw Discord server. There is a link in the description. So thank you for watching this video. If you want to see art like this before it goes up in these videos, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and you can become a member of the channel if you would like, and join the Learning to Draw Discord server. And that's going to be it for this video. So goodbye.